So we are experiencing the last Sunday in the month of March, and integrity has been the theme for this month. Integrity as in authenticity, honesty, coming forward really, and being available. And so since it's the Lenten season, the season before Easter, we've kind of been turning it on its end from the tradition of fasting from things that we enjoy, to fasting from behaviors, thoughts, attitudes, and speech that cause us pain and difficulty and separation. And feasting on that which nourishes those connections and those deep parts of us. So today I'm talking about fasting from ego and feasting on empathy. And this little story presented itself to me. One night at sea, the ship's captain saw what looked like the lights of another ship heading directly toward him. So he had his signalman blink to the other ship, "Change your course 10 degrees south." And the reply came back, "Change your course 10 degrees north." The ship's captain answered, doing the signaling, "I'm a captain, change your course south." And the reply came back, "I am a seaman first class, change your course north." And this really infuriated the captain, so he had his signalman signal, "Damn it, change your course south, I'm on a battleship." And the reply came back, "I'm in a lighthouse, change your course north." Empathy works in all kinds of ways. Sometimes we get our ego confused and we're wrapped up. When we're fasting from ego and feasting on empathy, we contain each other within ourselves. Now we know that there's only one, so it's true that we do anyway. We contain the parts of the people that we love, and we contain the parts of the people that we don't love. And they contain us as well, because there's only one. So we share all of the best and worst qualities that could possibly be with everybody else. And it's up to us to choose what we're going to emphasize, what we're going to feed, what we're going to feast on, to allow it to blossom and grow in our being, in our experience of life. So when we look at ego versus empathy, one of the things I want to bring to mind is that ego does kind of get a bad reputation for reasons that aren't entirely fair. Because truthfully, you have to have a healthy ego to exist on the planet. So when we begin as little children, we don't distinguish between ourselves and anyone or anything. And then as we begin to discover who we are, we recognize ourselves. So we know the difference between our foot and our finger and somebody else's foot or finger, or an animal, or a person we love or trust. We can begin to recognize the difference. And then, as we get a strong, healthy ego, we grow into a time when it's very important for us to begin to look past that and to grow in spiritual maturity so that we see ourselves in the others that we encounter. That's really the namaste blessing. The namaste is a Sanskrit word, and my favorite translation of it is, I bow to or I honor that place in you, where when you are in that place in you, and I am in that place in me, there is only one. That is what our spiritual development asks us to do. So, as Ram Dass would say, the game is to be nobody special. But it does seem you have to be somebody before you can be nobody special. So, it's the necessity of discovering ourselves truly and deeply, and then seeing that core beingness that is the one in those that are around us. I see Sue nodding over here, one of our practitioners. You know, our ego really, if you boil it down, is just our self-concept. It's who we think we are, who we believe ourselves to be. And we have to have some sense of who we think we are, even though it's actually wrong, because it's all these limited, convoluted ideas that we cannot really actually know the fullness of ourselves, because being an expression of the infinite, our little brains would just blow a circuit. They couldn't comprehend the wholeness that we are. So we have a little subset, and we identify that as us. That becomes what we're familiar with, our self-concept. And I think that sometimes we have a fear of empathy, particularly if we're particularly intuitive or empathic, because we find ourselves carrying other people's energy and feelings around with us, and sometimes we don't even realize they're not ours. Sometimes we do. And not everybody has that particular level of sensitivity. But I think we get concerned that we will be overwhelmed with the need and the pain and the challenges and difficulties of other people in the world. And so we're afraid to get too kind and helpful, because then there'll be 25 more that we need to be kind and helpful to, and 25 more, and 25 more, and pretty soon we'll be all eaten up. So there's a fear of being overwhelmed. There's also, I think, a fear that to be empathic or empathetic means to make yourself a doormat. To basically say, I can feel what you feel, and therefore everything you do about that is justified, and you can do whatever you want to. But that really isn't what it is either. And we also, I think, sometimes fear that to be empathic or empathetic means that everyone deserves a yes to anything they ask for or to anything they want. You know, Ernest Holmes, our founder, said once, we don't teach that you can have anything you want. That is a misinterpretation of our teaching. We teach that you can have whatever you can become in consciousness. In other words, when we grow spiritually to the point that we are a vibrational resonant match for something in our lives, it shows up, whether it's greater health or happiness or relationships, and it isn't dependent on the circumstances or what's going on. So we can have physical challenges and illnesses and still have a vibration of wholeness and health that helps to sustain the physical body if it's going through those kinds of challenges, with a consciousness that is wholeness, even when the experience is less than that. Does this make sense what I'm saying? Yeah. Also, I think the problem with empathy is we think that it's going to be a slippery slope, that if we do it for one, then the next one will find us, and the next one will find us. Where if we're better at just shutting it all off, nobody will come and ask us for anything because they're scared to, basically. So we have that problem, I think, sometimes with empathy. And then another problem we can have with empathy is when we begin to grow spiritually, we sometimes become so proud of ourselves that it actually becomes an ego quality. Like this monk who is meditating, and he says, whoa, suddenly he has a spiritual experience. He says, whoa, the individual ego does not exist. And he goes back into his meditation. And then the ego comes up and he says, I am so freaking enlightened. The challenge is to not get spiritually arrogant. Do you know? To not think that we have some awareness that's better than other people's, or we have some faith that's better than other people's, or whatever it might be, to inflate ourselves somehow over others. Yesterday, Amanda and I went out for a walk in the morning. And near where we live, there are a lot of wild turkeys. But I'm used to seeing a lot of wild female turkeys, but this must be mating season, because there were a lot of male turkeys out, and they were showing off. And so we got the display of the big tail feathers like this, and then something I didn't even realize they did, which is they puff their breasts up in the front. So there's big chest and big tail feathers and of course, you'd be overbalanced if you tried to run fast, so they have to strut. And they're all showing off to each other. Well, mine are bigger than yours. I can puff up and be more beautiful and powerful. And the females that are there, they're like, oh, honey, look at me. I'm so much better than that one over there. And they were so busy showing off that they didn't notice they had at least one female who was ready and waiting. But everybody was so busy competing that they didn't see. She's over there going, come on, guys, let's get on with it here. So there are, however, limitations to having not the strong, healthy ego, but the defensive ego. Now, I don't mean to necessarily put him down. It was just the best picture I could find of ego. And so we have here, with apologies to Simon Cowell, his photo. You're looking at if we want to compare a healthy ego with a defensive ego, what happens with a defensive ego is that it's vulnerable. And so in that recognition of its vulnerability and feeling like that is a danger, it is actually weak. And it's actually always fearful. And so the fear is, in the defensive ego, that there's going to be some kind of attack. And so the best defense is an offense in this story. And so there is a projection first and then an attack. So with a defensive ego, we always feel afraid. We always feel in danger. With a healthy ego, we recognize that our vulnerability has some benefits to it in terms of our connections, in terms of our humanness, and our availability to be community together. So when we're fasting from ego, then, and feasting on empathy, it is helpful for us to recognize the other person in ourselves. This little cartoon says empathy, and the homeless fellow on the street who has his hat at his feet is sitting there. It says empathy. Would this help? And he's got a mirror so that the people coming by, when they look down at him, see their own faces in the mirror. Would it help to recognize that that one is just me in a different experience, in a different disguise at that moment? You know, Mother Teresa used to talk about going out into the streets of India or going to meet heads of nations, princes and presidents, and treating them all the same and looking for what was the representation of the divine to her, looking for the face of Jesus in every one of them. As she would say, even in his most distressing disguises. Looking for the one, the namaste, the sacred being, the reflection of who we are. You are my reflection. There's only one, as the song says. So what happens with empathy is that the more experiences that we have in which we are challenged or we face difficulties, the more compassion we have for people who are going through those experiences. Have you noticed this? I find that in the midst of challenge, what happens is that qualities of mine that I was not aware of begin to come forward and get stronger and be revealed because I need them in order to cope with whatever the situation is I find myself in. And after that happens, when I see somebody else in that situation, I have much more compassion for them than I might have had before I had that experience. So when I hurt my back, I discovered after I recovered from that I have a lot of empathy for people who are dealing with back pain. When I got a divorce, I discovered after that I had a lot more empathy for people who had gone through or were experiencing a separation and divorce, because I certainly didn't have much empathy for them before that. Can you relate to this? And so experience empowers our compassion. So in a sense, when we're in the experience and we need the support of other people, that vulnerability that we're feeling is part of what allows us the access to those greater qualities that we are, and also to access the loving support, bless you, of the people in the community with us who, if we know that they're there and they know what we're experiencing, if we let them in, we feel not more vulnerable, but less. Because a burden shared, the weight of it is lifted somewhat. So in our experiences that are challenging, we are growing our empathy and compassion. They teach us lessons, they grow us, and they remind us. I was trying to figure out who said this, and there is no real certain attribution of who said this, but There but for the grace of God go I. Any one of us could be in a situation where we become a superstar overnight, or we become a homeless person with no place to be and no connection to family and friends. We could be any of those things, and we are all of those things, because the multiplication of the diversity of humanity, all of it lives within us. We have the capabilities of Jesus and Hitler, and we carry them around, and everything in between. And what we choose in the moment is what determines what our experience of life is. What we think of ourselves and the way that we think about other people. Not that we're going to be good at it all the time and always be thinking positively and responding positively, because we don't. At least I don't. Do you? I didn't mean that as a rhetorical question. Hello? I don't always come from the best place in myself. Do you? That's why we need forgiveness. And that's why we need self-forgiveness, because we have to be able to look back and go, ooh, wow, that was really unskilled. I did that really badly. In fact, I even had some negative intent, and I should clean that up. I would feel better if I clean that up, at least from the inside, if I clean it up. So when we're stepping into that place, what we have is an empowered, applied understanding that empathy is the place where I and the other overlap, where we see each other as connected, as that place. And this is why we need vulnerability. This is why we need the place of risk. We need the place of putting ourselves out there, even though we recognize we may lose something. Because connection is one of the most important things that we have. It's why we're here together on a planet, I think. I mean, we could each have our own planet if we didn't need to be connected to anybody. But we're here with a whole bunch of other people and creatures and the Earth itself and the solar system and the galaxy and so on and so on. We're not one alone. We are one in incredible diversity, getting to experience and express itself in all of these ways and pretending that there is such a thing as each other. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, said, "We can have no understanding of the divine unless we ourselves first exercise compassion." Isn't that interesting? He says, the very judgment by which we judge others becomes a self-judgment. It is as if the law of life were giving back to each one of us exactly what we have projected into it, as though everything that goes out from us must again return by a law of action and reaction. It's like a boomerang. If you throw it out there, it's going to come back to you. It's not going to go and thump somebody else. It's probably going to come back and thump you if you're not paying attention. So in the Gospel of Matthew, this is a portion of a story. I'm not going to go into the rest of it because I believe it goes off in a different direction. But he's talking about the sorting of the sheep and the goats in this parable. And he says, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For when I was hungry, you gave me to eat. Well, I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' And then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? Or when did we see you as a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?' And the king will answer and say to them, 'Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did this for one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did it for me.'" This is the Mother Teresa viewpoint that is being expressed here. If you did this to anybody else, no matter who, you did it for me. And you could go on and say, "And you did it for you." To any one of these, even the least, or even the most, because everybody needs compassion, love, support, resources. Yes? So when we actually feel fulfilled, it's not a matter of a successful ego that allows us to feel fulfilled in the defensive ego sense of things. Fulfillment comes from something else inside us. And it is not dependent upon opinions, comparisons, or history. It's not dependent upon our opinion of ourselves. It's not dependent upon comparisons with other people. It's not dependent upon what we did or didn't do in the past, how well or poorly we did or didn't do, how well or poorly somebody else did or didn't do. It results instead from taking meaningful action and recognizing that we are making some kind of incremental personal progress, that we have healthy connections with others. This is where we get a feeling of fulfillment. So when we step into a place where we choose to connect, when we choose to share authentically, and to allow someone else to share their experience and their feelings without trying to fix them or without trying to stop them, very often in a situation where a child is crying, you might have seen this or even done it, where a child is crying and the adult is comforting them, they'll say, there, don't cry. Well, don't cry is not the greatest thing to say. They're actually responding appropriately to the emotion that's flowing through. And once they get it out, they'll be done with it. Not like us, where we say, don't cry, and so we stuff it down, and then we carry it around with us for the next 40 years. You know, kids are done with stuff really fast when we acknowledge that and we allow them to be. When we recognize it and encourage it. A lot of times I think we comfort people, not so much to make them feel better as to make them stop being upset so that we'll feel better. And we become stronger in ourselves when we sit with that vulnerability and that discomfort and simply honor it and witness and allow it and invite them to tell us how they are rather than telling them how we think they should be. Are you resonating with that? Yeah. And so our founder, Ernest Holmes, also said, compassion and caring are the ties that bind us together in mutual understanding and in the unified attempt to uncover the divinity in each other. Compassion is the most gentle of all human virtues, for it is the outpouring of the divine givingness through all. And Pema Chodron, do you know who she is? Yes. So Pema Chodron, who is a Buddhist monk, and is the abbess of a Buddhist community in Canada, says, when you begin to touch your heart, or let your heart be touched, you begin to discover that it's bottomless, that it doesn't have any resolution, that this heart is huge, vast, and limitless. You begin to discover how much warmth and gentleness is there, as well as how much space. And so I want to share with you, in conclusion this morning, this story about empathy and vulnerability and grace. When I arrived at 2:30 a.m., the building was dark except for a single light in a ground floor window. Under these circumstances, some drivers would just honk once or twice, wait a minute, and then drive away. But I had seen too many impoverished people who depended on taxis as their only means of transportation. Unless the situation smelled of danger, I always went to the door. This passenger might be someone who needs my assistance, I reasoned to myself. So I walked to the door and knocked. Just a minute, answered a frail elderly voice, and I could hear something being dragged across the floor. After a long pause, the door opened. A small woman in her 90s stood before me. She was wearing a print dress and a pillbox hat with a veil pinned on it, like somebody out of a 1940s movie. And by her side was a small nylon suitcase. The apartment looked as if no one had lived in it for years. All the furniture was covered with sheets. There were no clocks on the walls, no knickknacks or utensils on the counters. In the corner was a cardboard box filled with photos and glassware. Would you carry my bag out to the car? She said. I took the suitcase to the cab and then returned to assist the woman. She took my arm and we walked slowly toward the curb. She kept thanking me for my kindness. It's nothing, I told her. I just try to treat my passengers the way I would want my mother treated. Oh, you're such a good boy, she said. When we got in the cab, she gave me an address and then asked, could you drive through downtown? It's not the shortest way, I answered quickly. Oh, I don't mind, she said. I'm in no hurry. I'm on my way to a hospice. I looked in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were glistening. I don't have any family left, she said. The doctor says I don't have long. I quietly reached over and shut off the meter. What route would you like me to take? I asked. For the next 2 hours, we drove through the city. She showed me the building where she had once worked as an elevator operator. We drove through the neighborhood where she and her husband had lived when they were newlyweds. She had me pull up in front of a furniture warehouse that had once been a ballroom where she had gone dancing as a girl. Sometimes she'd ask me to slow in front of a particular building or corner and would sit staring into the darkness, saying nothing. As the first hint of sun was creasing the horizon, she suddenly said, I'm tired. Let's go now. We drove in silence to the address she'd given me. It was a low building, like a small convalescent home, with a driveway that passed under a portico. 2 orderlies came out to the cab as soon as we pulled up. They were solicitous and intent, watching her every move. They must have been expecting her. I opened the trunk and took the small suitcase to the door. The woman was already seated in the wheelchair. How much do I owe you? She asked, reaching into her purse. Nothing, I said. You have to make a living, she answered. There are other passengers, I responded, and almost without thinking, I bent and gave her a hug. She held on to me tightly. You gave an old woman a little moment of joy, she said. Thank you. I squeezed her hand and then walked into the dim morning light. Behind me, a door shut. It was the sound of the closing of a life. I didn't pick up any more passengers that shift. I drove aimlessly, lost in thought. For the rest of that day, I could hardly talk. What if that woman had gotten an angry driver? Or one who was impatient to end that shift? What if I had refused to take the run? Or had honked once and then driven away? On quick review, I don't think that I've done anything more important in my life. When the moment arrives that we have an opportunity to choose some kind of empathy, we never know the power of that moment for ourselves or on somebody else. And there will be times when in the moment it isn't appropriate for us to choose empathy in that particular situation, and we'll maybe know that. And there will be times it will be appropriate and we might not choose it. But in those moments where that overlap happens and we choose the action, let us offer it to the other person for the highest and best for both of us. Let us fast from thinking ourselves good in that moment and just be another human being feasting together on empathy with someone. Namaste. Thank you. Now, I'm going to invite the practitioners to surround us. This is the time that we enter into prayer together. And so as we do this today, I just want you to notice how many people are surrounding you, many of them with their stoles on. Our licensed practitioners, many of them have been practitioners for 2 decades or more. So as we enter into prayer, I want to invite you to prepare to receive service as love and to put your hands over your heart and to invite it as you close your eyes to open and receive. In this moment, right here and now, love is all there is. It is the presence of the One, ever present, omniscient, filled with endless opportunities and possibilities, always open to us in love and more. This presence is what we're made from. It's where we came from. It's our home. That resonance is the truth of us. And there's nothing in the divine that does not also live in us. Some of it is well-formed and mature. Some of it is just now beginning to germinate and open. And other seeds remain to awaken later. We bless them all at this moment. And I know for each one of us in this place that we are ripening spiritually, that we are waking up and becoming more aware, that our hearts are deeper, fuller, freer, richer, and more filled with love than ever before. And in this moment, whatever we have need of for our own wholeness and growth and well-being, we call out to it, to the furthest ends of the universe and beyond. And we know that the response is immediate, that it manifests right where we are with no travel time, right here and right now. And we welcome it consciously. We open and stretch our receptivity even more than it ever has been before to acknowledge that good and let it in. And we do this not only for ourselves, we do it for all of our loved ones throughout the universes, whether we like them or not, all of the others of us. Knowing this is true, knowing this is good and real, we are grateful. Grateful to know this truth, to receive it, to accept it. And in this gratitude, we send this prayer out into that creative law that manifests it immediately, that can never say no, that always says yes, right now, yes, right here, yes. We let it go into the divine presence where it never has been otherwise. And it is already done. We let it be. And together we say, and so it is.